For 15 years, she has also written a humor column, which currently runs bi-monthly in newspapers in 11 states, as well as in Exceptional People and Black Hills Women magazines. She has won both humorous writing and speaking contests, including the Toastmasters Regional Humorous Speaking Contest. Today, she is speaking about the lighter side of caregiving. Dorothy Rosby.
Thank you, Ron. The brochure, I think, listed the title of my presentation as Humor Helps, Caregiver Lite. And I do think that humor helps, but I really thought of a better title later. So tell me what you think of this. The Sandwich Generation, Tales from the Turkey in the Middle. Because along with raising a 15-year-old son, I'm caring for a 94, soon to be 95-year-old mother. So I qualify as the poster child for the sandwich generation. Yes, my mother and my son are 80 years apart. I'm somewhere in the middle. And you know that demographers do have a name for this situation, and you know that. It's, well, what it is poor family planning is what they call that. But my mother has lived with us for about, on and off for about 10, 15 years, for months at a time, and now for about the last 3 years she has lived with me full-time, up until about a month ago when she had, again, a series of mini strokes, and she's right now recuperating in a nursing home about a block from my house. And so it's been, I mean, she's been with me a very long time. I'm number 9 out of 10 children. Is it any wonder she had a stroke? And you may ask yourself, why am I the one that is her primary caregiver? And she asks herself that also. But really, it is only a matter of location, location, location. All of my siblings had the good sense to move. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Before I say another word, I have to say that my mother is the kind of mother that any of her kids would have taken in. You would have taken her in. She's a very dear person, and she's a blessing. You know, giving care, I don't think, is quite as hard as receiving care. And my mother has taught me over and over how to receive care gracefully. And you might not believe this, but in all the time she's lived with me, this is a pretty long time, she has never, not once, criticized my cooking, my housekeeping, my caregiving, my cleaning, my parenting, any of that, truly. A lot of other people have criticized all of it. But she never has, and I appreciate that very much. So she is a blessing to us. Nevertheless, having a 95-year-old and a 15-year-old in the same house can be quite chaotic at times. And this is irrelevant. I'm going to tell you this is irrelevant, but really a lot of things I'm going to tell you are irrelevant. So, you know. Into this chaos, my son wants to bring a dog. He has begged and pleaded for a dog. So we finally got him a hamster. And you know, a lot of times I look at that little creature and I think, you, my little rodent friend, are the only living thing in this house who is not driving me mad. And he runs on a wheel all night. So even our plants are dying at my house. What kind of credibility do you have as a caregiver if your plants are dying? Don't make me use this, because I will. I'm going to leave it right here. Okay, now I know that my story as a caregiver is very different from your story, and yours is different from yours, and so on. But I do think we have a lot of characteristics in common. At least I hope we do. Otherwise, this is going to be very embarrassing for me to share these. So if you could just do me a favor, if you hear any similarities with your life as a caregiver, if you could just nod. That would make me feel better about myself, okay? So nod. The first characteristic I think we might all share is that caregivers are like ducks. You know how a duck is smooth on the surface and then they're paddling like heck underneath? Well, that's how I try to be. I never want my mom to know that any of her problems are a problem for me. I never want her to feel like a burden. So here's how living like a duck looks at my house. Okay, let's say she has a doctor's appointment, the third one this week, because when you're almost 95 years old, going to the doctor is sort of like your full-time job. But I have a full-time job too, and I'm at a meeting and it is running long, and if I don't get a move on, we're going to be late for the doctor. So the minute that meeting is over, I sprint down the hallway, I grab my purse, I run down the hall, forgot my keys, run back down the hall, get into my car, race home, go through every yellow light on the way home, screech into the driveway, jump out of the car, run into the house, and then I pause. Then I catch my breath, and I mosey into the living room. I glide like a duck. Because I don't want her to know that I have just shaved 2 years off my life on the way home, and probably off the lives of several pedestrians as well. And I say, "Hi, Mom, are you ready?" And she says, "Yes, just as soon as I use the bathroom." And that's when I crack. That's when I crack. Now another character, do you do that? No, okay. Another characteristic I think we might share is the clashing of roles. I'm sure you, like me, have a lot of other roles you have to play besides caregiver. I'm mother, wife, employee, sister, neighbor down the street, all of those things. And sometimes switching roles is like making sharp turns all day long. And sometimes I switch so fast I kind of run into myself. So I'm going to tell you about the worst example of when my roles collided. It happened a few years ago. It happened on what I affectionately call the worst day of my life. So here's what happened. My son, my 15-year-old son, he was, 12, he has asthma. And he woke up in the morning not feeling well, his chest was hurting, he was having trouble breathing. So I decided to keep him home. I called the school, kept him home. I called his doctor. They wanted to see him later that morning. I'd come back home, get him, take him to the doctor. Cool. I was ready to go to work. But then my mother got up, and she woke up with some odd swollen lump thing on her leg. So I called her doctor. They could not get her in, but they recommended I take her to the walk-in clinic immediately. So, you know, there's a reason I'm not calling it the run-in clinic, right? You can wait a long time at a walk-in clinic, depending on how many other people are having really bad days like you are. And there were a lot of people there that day having really bad days like we were. So we waited a long time, and we waited, and time was running out, and I still had my son's appointment. So finally they got her in, and were very concerned that she might have a blood clot. So then there were tests to run, and then there was waiting for test results, and meanwhile the clock is ticking. And I should tell you, I live on the west side of town, and the walk-in clinic is over there on Kill Hill, you know, where my son's doctors, where everything is over there in that same part of town, and I still have to get all the way across town. So I was thinking, this isn't going to work. So I called my husband, and I said, "Could you take our son to the doctor?" And he said, no, he could not. Always home. No, he couldn't. He had no wheels. His car was in the shop for routine maintenance. So I called my son and I said, "I'll reschedule your appointment. Everything will be cool." I thought he'd be happy because he hates going to the doctor, but he wasn't happy. He was very upset. He hurt. He was scared. Suddenly, I did not feel very ducky. I was the turkey in the middle. I called my husband again and I said, steal a car. And he did. No, he didn't. He didn't. But he borrowed mine and he took my son to the doctor and everything worked out fine and no one had to go to the hospital and even me. And I shaved another 2 years off my life that day. You know, I really am a lot younger than I was. The next characteristic that I think we all share as caregivers, please nod, you do have that one too, don't you, is a lack of time. A lack of time. Now when you hear, caregivers, when you hear that the average American watches 5 hours of television a day, don't you just want to tell them to come clean your house? 5 hours. Now I've always kind of considered myself a pretty good time manager, and I fully intend to prove it someday when I have time to manage. I always thought I'm kind of organized too, but I think that's mostly when you deal with the details of just my life. When you throw in the details of a 15-year-old who has asthma and extracurricular and a 95-year-old who has everything else, I'm not so organized. And I start to let things slide. I'm kind of like Scarlett O'Hara with a bigger waistline. You know how she said, I'll think about that tomorrow, I'll think about that. Well, I do that. I'll think about putting all those photos in the album tomorrow, and I'll think about doing my bank statement tomorrow, and I'll think about putting gas in the car tomorrow. You know, Scarlett didn't have to think of any of that kind of stuff. But I let those maintenance things slide, and then I started having to deal with complications that I wouldn't have had to deal with if I didn't keep putting off thinking about things tomorrow. Like, for example, right before the holiday season this year, I needed to replace all my tires. Now, tires don't get bad overnight, but all of a sudden they needed replacing. And my electronic calendar started shooting back to the year 2005 every time I turned it on. And that wasn't a good year for me. And then my oven started acting up, and that is not what you want to happen right before the holidays when you are going to be cooking Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's meals for all the people that come to visit the very nice person you take care of. You get a lot of company when you care for someone who has 10 children. You need an oven. I can't deal with any more complications. I mean, that was complicating my life. I can't deal with complications. I don't want any more car trouble, no health problems. I don't want any computer problems. I can't deal with identity theft. I don't want any, well, really, identity theft. Who would want to be me? Okay, so do you have that characteristics, you know, a lack of time? Okay, the next one that I think we might all share, and I'm kind of embarrassed to even talk about this. So if you don't nod, I'm not going to. Thank you. Okay, envy. I envy people who have time and freedom and flexibility. Do you? Because I do. I'm green with envy. I envy people who have hobbies. I don't have time to brush my teeth. I did today, but some days. I did today. But here's an example. My very dear sister and her husband are gourmet chefs. That's their hobby. I love it. You know, before I complain about that, I'm going to say I have benefited often from this hobby of theirs. But now I'll complain about it. Because one time they came to my house from out of town, and they spent a half an hour on my telephone calling all over town for Israeli couscous. Now, I have spent a half hour digging through my cupboards for a box of Kraft macaroni and cheese because we had to eat something. I envy people with time for hobbies. I envy people who shop for fun. Caregivers don't shop for fun, do you? You know the last thing I shopped for? I looked at the reading glasses at Walgreens while I was waiting for my mother's prescription. That's the last thing I shopped for. And I have reading glasses, I just don't know where they are. I envy people who travel. When my mom is with me, I go home every day at lunch, and I make sure she has lunch, and I make sure she's taking her medicines, and she's okay. But one day, not long ago, I made extraordinary arrangements so that I could go out to lunch. It's not a small thing when you're caring for someone to go out for lunch. So I did this, and I met my friend for lunch for her birthday, and she talked the whole lunch about all the problems and complications she was having arranging her upcoming 2-week vacation in Italy. And I gotta tell you, it wasn't that much harder than what I went through to go to lunch. Italy, schmiddly. You know what? I got away for 2 weeks in March. I went to a funeral in Nebraska. So envy. You feel that? Okay, now this is another one I'm kind of embarrassed to talk about. So if you could just nod, even if you don't feel this way. I sometimes have a sense of superiority over non-caregivers. I think that there is like a point system in heaven, and they're not going to get any. And I listen to them talk about being busy, and I scoff. And then non-caregivers do that thing, you know, that thing where they say, I could never do what you do. Have you ever heard that? And then we do that thing we do, which is we say, you know what it is?